In the United States, the history of slavery and legalized racial discrimination against African Americans coexist uneasily with a strong tradition of individual liberty. Indeed, for much of our history, Americans have struggled to reconcile such exclusionary racial practices without notion of individual rights. Let's start at the beginning. The first slaves brought to what became the United States arrived in 1619, a year before the Plymouth colony was established in Massachusetts. White Southerners built their agricultural economy, especially corn production, on a large slave labor force. By 1840, for example, nearly half the population of Alabama and Louisiana consisted of black slaves. The control of blacks through slavery was much part of a Southern culture that efforts to restrict or abolish slavery were met with fierce resistance. The hopes of African Americans for achieving full citizenship rights first seemed to be fulfilled when 3 constitutional amendments were adopted after the Civil War. The 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, the 14th Amendment, which guaranteed equal protection under the law, and the 15th Amendment, which guaranteed voting rights for blacks. Luckily, the adoption of the 14th Amendment civil rights became part of the Constitution. This equal protection clause launched a century of political movement and legal efforts to press for racial equality. It was December 1st, 1955, around 6 p.m. After working all day, I boarded the Cleveland Avenue bus. I paid my fare and sat in an empty seat in the first row reserved for blacks in the colored section. As the bus traveled along its regular route, I noticed all of the white-only seats in the bus had filled up. As the bus reached the 3rd stop, the bus driver moved the colored section sign and demanded that 4 black people give up their seats in the middle section so that white passengers could sit. I heard him yell at me, "Why don't you stand up?" And I responded, "I don't think I should have to stand up." He then proceeded to call the police, which led to my arrest. After this resistance, I was determined to make changes for the equality of African Americans, which unfortunately had not yet been met. Despite all the hardship African Americans had, there were still rights that needed to be fought for.